Welcome back to C programming tutorial. This tutorial is the continuation of the previous tutorial on the while loop. We were working on it. If you haven't watched that tutorial, please I would recommend that you do so by clicking on this link on the screen and also in the description. If you are watching this video on Facebook, make sure you become a fan of this page, and if you're watching it on YouTube, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel. So let's continue. So we were learning about while statement, and we did this little example here, which basically all it did was it decrement the value of x all the way until it became 2, and then it exited out of the loop. I don't know why I did that particular example, but just to show you that how to use the while statement, but it's not too practical. So let's do some other example here. This is the syntax of while statement. Let me put it in comments so that it does not, so that we can refer to it, but it does not confuse the compiler, because otherwise compiler is going to start giving errors, because this is not a valid statement. It's just showing the syntax of while loop. So let's take an example. You have to, we'll just do the same thing again. Let me start my timer here. So let's do the same thing again. Let's write some message, say 10 times. Suppose our job is to write a program which will write some message 10 times. So how are we going to do that? So let's do that. So obviously one way of doing it, as I said before, is to basically use printf, and I don't know, that message would be, this is the information age. Okay, and we can write this 10 times, but that's not a really cool way of doing it. Suppose what if user, let's do it this way. Let's see that the user actually enters the value, that how many times it wants this message to be printed, how many times it wants this message, this is the information age, to be printed. So first thing we will have to do, as we have learned before, is to input the value from the user. Let's call it the variable count. So we'll declare a variable count where we will store the value that user enters. So what are we going to do? We are going to use scanf to basically get the value, which is a number. So we'll say %d \count, like this. So this will basically get a value from the user. Now, before we start getting the value, let's write a simple message so the user knows what we are asking for. So how many times, ? So that way the user will basically know that we are basically asking it to enter the count. And then what do we have to do? We have to print this message, and this message needs to be printed how many times? As many times as there is a count. So suppose the user enters 10, so we have to print this message like 10 times. So what do we have to do? We have to loop. We have to do something repeatedly. Print this message again and again. Whenever you have to do something repeatedly, you put it in a loop. And the loop that we have learned so far is the while loop. Okay, so we'll use that while loop. So one thing is for sure, that there will be a while, because we have to do something repeatedly, and then whatever we have to do repeatedly, which in this case is to print this message, we have to put it in the body of the while loop, in the braces, for example, here. So we put this in the braces. So this is what we need to do. How many times? 10 times, or whatever the number of times that the user has entered. So what do? We have to do something here to basically say the condition which should remain true for as long as we have to print this. So we will print this message for when this condition is true. So what do? We basically have to come up with the condition. What would be the condition? So we have to basically run this loop for as long as it is run less than 10 times, if the user has entered 10 times, or less than the count that the user has entered. Okay, But what would be the less than 10? What should be less than 10? So we need, looks like we need some other variable, some other variable which would be the loop counter. Okay, so we will call it loop counter, which will count how many times the loop has executed. In other words, how many times we have already printed this message. So we will call it loop counter, and we will initialize it to some value, say 0, because right now when you get here, when the program is going to get here, it will start, the program will execute one line at a time, and when program gets here, it hasn't printed any time, not even a single time this message, right? So we are going to say loop counter is 0, and then in this condition we will say that you keep on printing for as long as loop counter is less than count. In other words, for as long as you have printed, the number of times that you have printed is less than the number of times that user wants you to print. So this will be our condition right here. And one very critical thing that I told you in the last tutorial, when when I was defining teaching this while statement here, that at least one of these statements have to modify this condition. And look at this here in this body right now, there is no change being made anywhere to this condition. In other words, neither the loop counter variable is changing nor count is changing. So what do we have to do? Do we have to change the count here or the loop counter here? Yes, we have to change the loop counter here, because loop counter is supposed to count the number of times this has looped, the number of times we have run the body of the loop. So every time when we run the body of the loop, we have to increment the value of loop counter by 1. Would this do it? Well, this will increment the value of loop counter, but we have to store this result. If the value of loop counter is 1, we have to change it to 1 plus 1, which is 2. We have to change it to 2. So in other words, we have to write loop counter is equal to loop counter plus 1. In other words, we have to add 1 to the loop counter and then assign it back to loop counter here, so that the value of loop counter changes. A quick way of doing it in C is basically use the plus plus operator. The plus plus operator is the same as what I have done here. So loop counter plus plus does the same as loop counter equal to loop counter plus 1, but it's just that it's smaller, shorter, and elegant. So let's use that, loop counter plus plus. You could always use loop counter equal to loop counter plus 1 also, but let's use loop counter plus plus. So what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, I already printed this once. The next time when it's going to go through it, it will say, okay, I already printed it twice, then thrice, 4 times, 5 times, until the loop counter becomes the same as the count. So do we have to execute this loop even when it is equal to count? Suppose count is 1, which means the user wants it to be printed 1. Okay, so we come here, loop counter value is 0 from the beginning, and then 0 is less than 1, because value of count is 1. 0 is less than 1. Then printf, we print this thing, and then loop counter value becomes 1. Then 1 is less than 1. We already printed it once. That's what user wanted us to print, and then loop counter value is become 1, and 1 is less than 1 is false, so it exits out of the loop. So we are done. So count was 1, we printed it once, and we are done. So it works. So let's see if it works or not. How many times? 5. Look at this. This is the information age, this is the information age, and so on. So what happened? We entered the value of count as 5, count became 5, loop counter was 0, we printed it, incremented loop counter by 1, it became 1, then we printed it, we checked the condition, 1 is less than 5, it is true, yes, 1 is less than 5, and then we print this again, and so on until finally the value of loop counter becomes 5, and then we say 5 is less than 5, it is false, we exit out of the loop and the program ends. So we end up in printing this message 5 times. Thank you for watching. Please be sure that you subscribe to this channel and rate this video 5 stars. Thank you so much.